May I have your attention, please? All luggage and parcels must be attended at all times.
Right now I'm just going to meet up with my son and give him a few dollars so he can get something to eat. He's living on the streets. He doesn't have a place to go at this point. He's schizophrenic, and I'm just trying to help him out right now. He's probably been on the street for over a year. He's lived at his grandmother's house in Brooklyn for a little while, but she couldn't tolerate him anymore, and so he was put out. He can't return to my town because the cops out there treat mental illness as a crime. They just want to keep the streets cleaned up. At 12 years old, he stole my car and crashed it into a hydrant. And at that point, I took him to Four Winds Hospital in Westchester to be evaluated. He was then diagnosed as bipolar, and they gave him some meds, and he was okay for a little while. But as time went on, his mental illness got worse. He started going in and out of schools, and most of them had just asked to get him out because he wasn't cooperating with the programs. Eventually, I moved to New Jersey. My wife was ill at the time. She had a brain aneurysm, and from 2002, after she had this brain aneurysm, she was handicapped. So I had to move to a house that was a ranch, and I went to near a relative, so somebody could help out. This devastated my son and me, and it was a very hard on all of us. She lived for till 2008, and she passed away from that, which completely destroyed him. And shortly afterwards, he started to develop symptoms of schizophrenia, where he was seeing things that weren't there, talking about aliens and just very strange things. He's been picked up on the street by the police as an emotionally disturbed person, which police would say is an EDP. Most times he's released within 2 days. They give him pills to take, and they send him on his way. He usually doesn't have the pills for more than 2 days before they're gone. He sold them, he takes a lot, whatever, they're just gone. And I'm back to square one, where he's on the street, and he's got no place to go.
I see the future. I see the future. The future is hard to see because it's undecisive. It's not distinctive because anything can happen before in a second. You really can't tell what's going to happen in the future. I mean, you can tell if everything's going to be okay or if it's going to be like all right, but you can't really describe exactly what's going to happen in the future unless it's the truth. The doctors keep telling me I'm schizophrenic, but honestly, I mean, I'm more of a type of guy that just has bad anxiety.
Last week, he was held against his will for staying in somebody's house that he was paying $25 to stay there. The people called and said, can I, we want $100. And I was like, no, I'm not paying you $100. I said, and I hung up the phone, and they eventually called back and said, all right, we'll take $50. And I was like, well, they wanted me to Western Union the money. They didn't want to see me and all that. But I said, no way. I said, if I'm paying you $50, I want my son. So I went to Bushwick and Myrtle, and I met these people. They first came without my son. I said, no, go get him. And they brought him back, and he was all beat up, and he didn't look very well. And I gave him the $50, and I took my son, and he was a mess. I'm really looking for assisted housing. So these are homes where they watch the mentally ill, and They're free to come and go as long as they take their meds, and there's usually doctors on premises. But it seems that nobody's offering me these services, which are available to people.
How do you feel about like sleeping on the trains and stuff like that?
People don't really bother me. They don't see who I am. You know, put my jacket over me. Like, no one really bothers me. It's once in a while. It's not every week. It's just like once every maybe like it's like maybe it's like once a week, maybe twice a week. It's not that bad. You know, it's just to get a nice sleep. I sleep pretty good, but you know, I really rather have a bed. You know, we're never going to have a bed. I'd rather have a bed in the apartment than go home.
Well, the first time, I went on the streets, I was 18 years old, so it was about 2 years ago. My girlfriend came over one Friday, and she spent the weekend, and my mom, I was upstairs in my room. I went downstairs, and my mom was trying to, she was very drunk, and she uses a lot of drugs, and my mom was trying to have, sexual trying to do things with my girlfriend. And I'm like, Ma, what are you doing? She said, oh, leave me alone, I don't care. She was really drunk. And I'm like, I'm crying, that's my girlfriend, what are you doing, And she just started acting crazy, started pushing me away and said, get out the house. And I just went upstairs, ignored her for the whole night. And then the next day I woke up, I went downstairs, and I went to get something to eat, trying to ignore the whole situation. My mom said, you gotta get out the house, you gotta get out the house. I don't want you in this house, you're bringing too much problems to this house. And I got kicked out. The house. I had 2 suitcases with all my clothes. And I was sleeping in the parks. I was sleeping in the staircases with my girlfriend. I was sleeping in buildings, with my girlfriend, and it was just tough. It was really tough. Barely taking a shower, barely brushing my teeth at the time. It was tough.
Tell us how you came to Fortune Society.
I came to Fortune Society in 2005. At the time when I arrived, I was homeless. I had just been released from prison. I had spent a good portion of my adult life, 16 years in prison, and on the streets as a homeless adult. I spent much of my time as a child homeless as well. And when I came to Fortune Society, I had a number of issues, including drug addiction. And of course, I faced the barriers of anyone that is released from prison.
What was it like being homeless and being on the street?
A lot of times I would try to sleep in places such as Port Authority or Penn Station. Penn Station, for instance, you can't sleep there. Years ago, maybe you could, but the city doesn't put up with that type of thing anymore. So I would go there and I would find a quiet spot. I would get probably 10, 15 minutes sleep, and then a cop would wake me up and tell me I have to leave, and I would have to find another corner or something like that to sleep in. So overall, what it provided me was a really, really, really overwhelming sense of hopelessness, and it was embarrassing as well, like if you slept on a train, in the middle of the night, you go to sleep on a train, it's pretty much empty, depending on which train you're on. And then you wake up, and when you wake up, it's a crowded train, it's rush hour. People are going to work, people are dressed up, such as yourself, obviously going to work or whatever it is they're doing. And I would hang my head because I wouldn't want to make eye contact with people because it was embarrassing.
How did you get through that?
For years, it was just a cycle. For years, my homelessness fed my addiction. My addiction resulted in jails and prisons. And following that, I'd be released to the streets, literally, because I was homeless again. So it was, I hate to be a cliche, but it was a vicious cycle.
And did that process become normal for you? Did you expect anything different, or was you just figured out how to survive?
I think the process became part of my life. The thing about being homeless is you kind of get worse and worse. It's progressive, and I think that the thing about it that's really depressing is you don't really look towards the future too much. Most of your concerns are immediate concerns. Where am I going to sleep right now? Where am I going to eat? stuff like that. So it's very difficult to focus on the future when all your concerns are so immediate and so demanding.
You said that you've spent 16 years in and out. I'm sure you spent a lot of time on Rikers, going in and out of Rikers. What was it like for you when you got released from Rikers? Walk us through that experience.
Being released from Rikers is kind of a funny thing, you know, because not funny like haha, but just curious. When you're released from Rikers Island, you are basically you go to the last meal, which is around 4 or 5 o'clock. From there, you're brought to a bullpen. In the bullpen, which is a cell, a holding cell, you are kind of like sardine packed in with everybody else that is being released. This is particularly crowded on a Friday because those who are scheduled to be released Saturday and Sunday are also released on that Friday. So you're packed into these cells where you go through the lengthy process. The discharge process, including signing forms, getting whatever money you may have in your account, whatever personal properties, and this is really, really, really lengthy. So basically, you're in this cell until anywhere between 1 and 4 or 5 in the morning, at which point you're going to be released. They release you after this lengthy process they put you on a bus, and then the bus takes you over a short way to Queens Plaza in Queens, and they release you from there. They just let you off the bus in the middle of a pretty much deserted area. Long Island City is primarily factories and such. Deserted area. The only people that are there before you arrive are prostitutes, drug dealers, stuff like that. So to me, this is kind of counterproductive. If the Department of Corrections is really trying to have an impact on the recidivism rate, then this is counterproductive.
When I was growing up, I grew up with my grandmother. At the age of 8 years old, I was molested by a family member. So the agency, you know, they took me in foster care. Went to foster care at the age of 8 years old. I was in foster care for about 4 years. It was tough. I mean, I was in 4 different foster homes. It was just really tough. The first foster home I was in, she was a Spanish lady. She took me in. The first day, I'm just in my head like, what was going on? Why am I here? I was crying. I missed my family, and I realized, you know, I have to raise myself. For the first week I was in foster care because the foster parents that I had did not care and was there just for the money, you know, and for their own pleasures. So I realized I had to take care of myself. We was outside all day. We was in upper like Manhattan, Harlem. It was like in the projects. She didn't care at all. We was just outside until 3 o'clock in the morning. Imagine being 8 years old, 9 years old, being outside 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, without any supervision or any adults at all whatsoever. And one time, this right here is crazy. One time I was in I was in the kitchen. She made some food and I was eating the food. I didn't like the food. So she forced me to eat it. I threw up. And when I threw up, she forced me to eat my vomit. And it was tough. It was tough, you know. So then I just ran to the room and I started crying, you know, and I said, I have to speak to the social worker. I can't be here. So then after I spoke to the social worker, they transferred me to a different foster home. I was in Lydia's house, another Spanish lady. Her nephew was horrible, you know. Her nephew one time, you know, molested me and my little sister also as well there, and after the 4 years, my mom won, you know, she won custody over me and my two little sisters at the time. So I moved in with my mom at the age of 13, 12 years old, turning 13. And we moved in and I never had love from her because she never gave me love. So it was tough. And I had to basically learn everything myself, how to speak properly. I mean, I'm learning that now. You know, it was tough. And I started dancing at the age of 13 years old. Once I reached high school, freshman year, I started dancing and I started performing on the streets. And that's how I started, you know, taking care of myself from there on.
Covenant House began over 40 years ago. It started with just a priest helping a few kids on the Lower East Side in a small apartment. And today, we provide care for over 50,000 homeless and trafficked youth. Our vision for the kids, for Covenant House kids, is for them to leave here, for them to become independent, healthy members of the community. And independent not just economically, but also emotionally. But the reality is that the population that we're working with, these teenagers and young adults have been through a lot. Almost 40% of them are survivors of child abuse and neglect. Over 40% of them have witnessed domestic violence in the home. They're all from communities of poverty. Many of them have been manipulated into prostitution. Some of them were trafficked as children, trafficked for purposes of the sex trade. They've all experienced some form of trauma.
Modern homelessness began in the early 80s, and there were a few causes. One was there was a movement to deinstitutionalize people who were in mental institutions. It was viewed as much more humane to not treat them in large mental hospitals, but to move them into smaller community-based residences that would be augmented by community mental health centers. It was great in theory, and it actually worked very well. This really was also prompted by the rise in the advances of psychotropic medications, where people could be treated on an outpatient basis. From the 1960s until now, the number of mental health beds in hospitals have declined by 90%. But what did not happen was there was not a corresponding rise in community mental health centers or community residences where mentally ill people were supposed to go. So what happened was many neighborhoods said, I don't want these community residences in my neighborhood, which gave rise to the expression NIMBY, not in my neighborhood. And the funding for the community mental health centers never reached their potential, what was billed when the hospitals were shut down. So what we have is we now have many fewer mental health resources for people who are severely mentally ill than we did 50 years ago.
Well, you'll hear a lot of conflicting numbers about this because it depends who you count as homeless, but you can go online any day and look at the Department of Homeless Services and get the number of the census in the city shelters, which this winter hit record levels, according to the Wall Street Journal, highest levels since the Great Depression, over 60,000 men, women, and children in the city shelters. But that doesn't include all the shelters like our shelter, which is private, many others like ours in the city, as well as those that choose to sleep, in subways and perhaps on a park bench if it's not too cold. And then there's many others that actually are jumping from friend to relative. They're really homeless, but they're kind of taking advantage of friendships, which will eventually wear out. So when you put all those numbers together, my best estimate would be 80,000 or more in New York City. The fastest growing population in New York City are children.
Well, my name's Heather. This is my little brother Travis. My mom, we had a place in East Flatbush, and she left. She met a younger guy, and she left and moved to Florida. And I was working and trying to keep up with the rent, and I got laid off, and couldn't keep up with the rent, so we eventually got evicted. I tried to fight it, but tried to get a grant or something to help, but it didn't pan out like I wanted to. So we eventually had to leave. We've gone to drop-in centers. You can stay, but they're also not really safe. For me being a woman and him, he's little and young. So they're not the best. So pretty much we stay on the train. I went to college. I graduated from high school. I went to college, and I'm still asking for change.
My name is Christopher Duffy. I've been homeless since 2009, and I'm currently in the Oliveri Drop-In Center. I was in the mortgage industry, and when it crashed in 2007, I tried feverishly to close my accounts. I had a lot of accounts that were active, and then the industry narrowed drastically. In 2009, I just gave up and tried to get other jobs and did not get hired for another year. So I was on the streets when I got hired, and then I went into Bellevue shelter. The first day that I was homeless, I couldn't believe that that had happened. I thought I did everything to prevent that, and I just remember sitting on that bench in the Bellevue and with my head down like, how did I end up here? Overnight, I would be walking the streets, and then when sunlight around 6, 7 o'clock, I would go to a park and I would fall asleep. That was in the spring and summer. When it got to the fall and the winter, depending on the weather, when it was too cold or snowing or raining, I would just stand under like a port, like a canvas of a store or anything like that. And just, I don't know how I did it, I really do not, but I did it. And it wasn't the last time I was on the streets. I have a God in my life, and I believe that He's watching over me. And I think I have a choice whether to wallow in my misery or stay positive and work towards an answer. So whether I don't know whether I'm positive or negative, I go with this because this seems to get me through the day.
Before I was homeless, I lived a really good life. My mom was an educator, and I was very well provided for. And I've worked my whole life. I worked on a farm when I was 12 years old for the first time, and then I always had jobs as soon as I turned 14. And honestly, things have just gone hard. I lived in Denver for the past 3 years, and unfortunately, right before I planned to move back to New York City, my apartment got robbed by someone that I knew, and I stupidly had all of my savings in cash, but it was still, an unfortunate thing to happen to us.
And then how did you go from Colorado to here?
We had a little bit of side savings that we had put with my boyfriend's brother. We had actually loaned him money, and he was holding on to it. But so we used that. It was only like $2,000, and we used that to come travel back out together. And then kind of just it got spent. He's very expensive.
And where's your boyfriend now?
He's working right now.
He's working. What kind of work is he doing?
He's a tile setter, primarily. But he does all sorts of construction. Occasionally, he'll even work for the temp agency that I work for if work is slow as a cook. So we're really trying as hard as possible to get up the money to get an apartment. I work for a temp agency, waitressing every once in a while when they need me. But it's still really hard to make ends meet. We are sleeping in Central Park. It's hard.
So my name's Ramos, I'm 44, Puerto Rican. I'm from Puerto Rico, originally from Puerto Rico. Moved over to New York when I was about 8 or 9. And so my parents, I was an orphan, so I was awarded a state till I was 18. I aged out. So pretty much you could say I was homeless my entire life. I've never really had, I've had my own apartment a couple times when I was working and all that. But it was never felt like a home,
What would you like to see the city do, or what would just like the average individual do for people like yourself?
I think that the one big thing that was a help a couple of years ago was the Advantage program. They had rent subsidies for people in shelters. So there was a process. You would go into a shelter, and once you started working, you could get a rent subsidy. And that helped a lot. A lot of people went from being on the street to in their own place, and they were able to, work and keep their apartment up for a couple of years. And then just this past year or whatever, I saw a lot of those same people who had those apartments now are back on the street again. And it's, you know, it's impossible to keep a job when you're on the street. Like, you know, you can do it for a short amount of time, but if it's, you know, the rents are so crazy, you need, you know, you need $7,000 just to get into an apartment, any apartment. You know what I mean? You need 2.5 months rent, security, all that, you know. You know, that's, you know, it's kind of hard to do when you're on the street.
By far, the biggest challenge, especially in New York City, for the homeless is affordable housing. You know, if we can do a good job of helping them address addictions or issues of child support, legal problems, immigration, all the things that might be part of their homelessness, and take care of those things and then find employment, typically the jobs they're going to get, at least initially, are going to be low-paying jobs, minimum wage or maybe slightly higher. And then you think about, how is a person making that kind of wage going to live in this city when the rents are so high? And it's not just true in you know, Lower Manhattan or Midtown. It's true in Harlem. It's true in the Bronx. Most areas of the city now, the housing costs are getting to a point where it's nearly impossible for someone to come out of homelessness and find a place to live.
Hello, everybody. I wanna tell you something that we need to know about this struggle for rent protection. A couple of months ago, I did a report. Listen to this. I did a report to try to figure out how much housing units that were affordable that we lost over the last 12 years. We lost 400,000 affordable housing units that rented for $1,000 or less, and that is why we have a city for the very, very wealthy, for enclaves for the poor, and nothing in between. And if we lose rent protection, if we don't improve rent protection, then this city will be lost to the next generations that came here to build a life, do the right thing, build communities. All that will go away. I'm telling you today that this struggle in Albany is about the future of our city. That we cannot allow the speculators and developers to push the people out who built up our neighborhoods. The people who came with nothing and turned daycare centers into places for children in the schools. Rent protection ensures working people, people who come here to do the right thing, have an opportunity. We have got to go to Albany and demand of our elected officials rent protection that's real, that matters. And I'm telling you as controller, the dollars and cents, this is about affordability, but opportunity for all of our people. We've got to raise the minimum wage, create strong rent protection, and take on Wall Street, and that's how we're going to create a fair city. It starts in Albany, and it starts right now. The fight for 15 is about the fight for rent protection. It goes hand in hand, and we have to win both. Keep this fight up. I will see you in Albany in the next few weeks. Thank you very much.
When you think of homelessness, I think it's useful to think of famines. And when we look at the history of famines, they're rarely caused by a shortage of food. They're caused because people can't afford food. Something has changed in their conditions that makes it impossible for them to afford food. Either their incomes have gone down or the price of food has gone up. And the same thing with housing. Housing is a good that we provide mostly through markets, so when people can afford them, they have housing, and when they can't, they need other means. And so when we have big increases in homelessness, as we had in the Great Depression, it's because a large percentage of the population no longer could afford to support themselves. They lost their jobs. Unemployment went from 3% in the late 20s up to 25%. So you had a big chunk of the population who couldn't afford to pay the rent. So there wasn't a shortage of housing, there was a shortage of purchasing power or income for those who wanted to rent those houses. And so in New York City, what we had is, and in many cities across the country, we had these Hoovervilles spring up in most of the major parks. in which mostly men were living in tents or in shacks that they had built, both because they had no other place to go and also to make a statement that here we are, and someone has to recognize that there's a problem and do something about it. So New York State had a response. Then when Roosevelt became president, there was more of a response, a federal response, to give grants so that people can acquire housing. That started to improve the situation, but really it was World War II and the end of the Great Depression and the bring about of full employment that homelessness was no longer a massive problem. And then in the 1970s, we see an increase in homelessness, visible homelessness, and people sleeping in the subways and all around New York City. And at the time, many people thought it was a response to the deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill. We used to house, hundreds of thousands of mentally ill patients in huge facilities. Pilgrim State, was one of the biggest out on Long Island where I grew up. And these were all shrunk and closed down with the idea that we would move them into community-based. The problem was we deinstitutionalized the mentally ill without funding and setting up the small local community facilities that would absorb them. And so a good number of the mentally ill went from being in mental institutions to briefly being homeless and then being institutionalized in the criminal justice system.
I was staying in New Jersey for a while, but they criminalized me for something that wasn't true. So I kind of just left Jersey after I took care of my problems in Jersey. It was just paying back money, which is ridiculous because New Jersey should not be able to push a warrant onto you because you don't have the money to pay. It's a little ridiculous in Jersey, but I mean, maybe you can look into it, guys.
I eventually was remarried last year and have a stepdaughter. I'm afraid to bring him home. Not that I think he would do anything, but he is, he does talk to himself and he says crazy things, and it's just not I just want it to be a safe place. And plus I have the problem with the police who, every time they see him, they pick him up out there and arrest him for loitering and panhandling. And when I approach them and I say, he's mentally ill, really you should get him some help, they have no interest in doing anything out there.
So as a policy analyst, I do see that unfortunately our government, particularly at the local level, has enacted policies that very much hurt the homeless individuals. Unfortunately, there's really been an increase in criminalization of homelessness, particularly at the local level across cities, in cities across the country. So for example, there's the National Coalition for the Homeless conducts reports in terms of criminalization laws, and they found that there's been an increase of over 100% of laws prohibiting individuals from sleeping in their cars. These are individuals who have no place to go. For example, Santa Cruz, California, they don't have shelters, and so they really have no place to go, so they'll sleep in the car, and we're criminalizing it. And as a result of criminalizing it, we're putting them back in jail, increasing the costs of serving this population, as well as really impeding their progress to self-sufficiency. Many people think that a homeless individual on the streets doesn't cost us anything, and in actuality, that's not true. A homeless individual on the street can cost up to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, depending on the individual's needs for hospital services in terms of emergency hospitals, for repeated jail, prison, etc.
I got my forms. I'm signing in consent to Help USA. Help USA is going to hopefully get me an apartment. I really hope it gets pushed through quick because, living on the streets is brutal, but it's getting warmer, so it's not even that bad. During Christmas time, I went to Miami for like 2 months. I paid for a ticket with my Social Security, and I went out there and I enjoyed the weather for 2 months. It was great. I got an apartment, but it was in a bad neighborhood. It's called Little Haiti. It was a really bad neighborhood, and I kind of got robbed from my cell phone and a whole bunch of things. My cars, they're very disrespectful. I don't know, it wasn't the right neighborhood for me, and I kind of got robbed because I paid rent. I had to leave early because of such circumstances of physical violence. And like I said, there's violence everywhere. Like if you're outside, but if you're inside a house, you can avoid so much more.
Oh, he didn't have enough money to rent any apartment. I'm sure he told me he was sleeping on the beach, and He was down there for about a month, waiting for his check to come again so he can get enough money to come back. He went down there originally because it was so cold in December, and he was living on the street, and he didn't know what to do with himself, and he thought he'd go somewhere where it was warm. He does have a sister living in Orlando, and I think he believed that he was going to be able to go see her, but she was just afraid to have him come by because she can't afford to support him either. So he continued to Miami. He took a bus. It took him days. He was actually happy to get on the bus and sleep. It was like a place for him to stay warm, and he didn't even care that it took 24 hours to get there.
Why didn't he fly?
Oh, he has no ID. There's nothing in his pocket. He loses everything. I gave him his passport, his license, all that stuff has just been misplaced, including his medical card. He's lost that. They just gave him prescriptions again. I don't know what he's going to do with them. He can't fill them. It's just unbelievable. I don't know what I'm going to do. He has no concept of money. If you give him $10, you give him $100, $500, he will spend it in one day, and it's gone. It seems that the friends he finds are usually people who are on drugs because nobody else will deal with them. It's a very lonely place for him. And, he wants friends. He wants to be able to communicate to people, but he can't find anybody who's normal and to be able to hang out with and talk to. And he's very lonely. I know that. It's partly why he calls me a lot, because he's got nobody else to talk to. He refuses to go to homeless shelters. He just won't go. I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to go to the Bellevue Men's Health Shelter. It's on 30th Street, Manhattan. I've been there for news jobs, and it's not a clean place. It's just, I don't blame him. It's not even a safe place. And he would rather live on the streets.
My homelessness, when I was homeless, I went through the shelter systems here in New York. They're horrible. I wouldn't advise anyone to go through them. If they could find the help somewhere. I stumbled upon this agency that I'm at today by chance. I happened to go to one of the clinics to see a doctor there, and this lady walked in and said, "Does anybody have any problems with homelessness?" And I said, "I do." They had just kicked me out of the shelter, my husband and I, and said that we weren't eligible. And she gave me this information, and I came here to SUS, and they were great. I'm now in an apartment. It's small, but it's mine. I told the people at the agency where you sign in and do your interview, I told them I was a veteran, and they said they didn't care. So I called the mayor's office, and I called that department that helps, and they gave me the wording to use, and I used that, and it still didn't matter. They didn't care that I was a veteran.
My name is Jerry Rivera. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, and right now my wife threw me out of my house like 3 weeks ago. I'm practically homeless out here. I've been on and off with drugs since I came out of the Army in '85. I suffer from PTSD. Went to Grenada in the '80s. We were fighting Cubans over there. It was a fast skirmish. We beat them, but I saw horrible things. I saw people getting shot. I saw heads blown off. I saw body parts. Nasty stuff that when you see it, the adrenaline is pumping and you don't think about it. You're in survival mode. But when the whole thing is over, that's when you really think about it. That's when it starts coming into your head, and it doesn't leave your head. And sometimes drugs, it helps. The drugs help for it to get out of your head at least temporarily. A lot of these medications that they give you at the VA take forever to work. So you get anxious and you get desperate for it to work. And by the time you're waiting for it to work, you just can't take it anymore. And you go out there and you do what you gotta do. Hopefully today, if I don't die tonight, I'm gonna get the help that I need. But I'll be honest with you, even today I was thinking of committing suicide. But I'm still thinking about my daughter, and that's what's stopping me from committing suicide. because I can't take this anymore. I'm out here because I promised my wife that I was going to get to the hospital. I got a 6-year-old daughter. I got a 21-year-old daughter that seen me going through this since I came out of the Army, since she was born in '94. And my other daughter was born in, God, I can't even remember, but she was born, she's 6 now. So you make the math. I'm not in the right state of mind. And I've tried real hard. There's a lot of us like us out here. It's not our fault. You know, we suffer from mental illness. Sometimes the medication don't work for us. It gets us like worse than the depression we're going through, and we end up out here in the streets. And I'm not a bad person. I'm not a criminal, and I'd rather ask for money than to steal or do stupid things like some of these other people out here that get drugs and do drugs do. But right now, to be honest with you, I'm heading to the hospital soon. I'm going to the VA hospital on 23rd Street so they could help me. I don't know if I'm going to get my wife back, but at least if I can get this monkey off my back, I know I'll be able to see my daughters, especially the little one who loves me a lot. She's very cute. Her name is Ruby. And I've tried real hard. It's been a struggle. I'm a soldier.
Okay, well, I had him picked up once again on Fort Hamilton in Utrecht and taken to the hospital where Coney Island Hospital promised to keep him this time, and they actually did. They kept him for 3 weeks. I went in for a meeting and decided that he was stable enough to be transferred to a drug rehabilitation center upstate. So after a few days, he was transferred up there last week, which was Wednesday. I don't know the date, but he went up there. He was taken up there by a van, and when he found out it was voluntarily, that he didn't have to leave, that he could leave, he just walked out and somehow walked to the train station and got on the train and was home the same day. So now I'm back to square one. He's back on the street.
Nice little $20 watch, so I love that. You know what I mean? They do, you know, the little things make me happy. $30. I had this. I got this as a gift from Nick. Nick screwed me on the Rolex. Rolex, I got screwed. It was fake, but whatever. I was trying to make a quick buck off the Rolex, whatever. It was broken. It was two people gave me two watches in the street. A Rolex and some, what is it, Depierre? Or Manier, something like that. I don't know. I sold the Manier on Wall Street for, the Diamond District for $100, and I had the fake Rolex. I was about to sell it at $30 in a little pawn shop, but then when I got it, so I was like, whatever. I let my friend hold it, and you know what he did? He went freaking relapse. This guy's a drug addict. You know, I try so hard to help people. I got this kid dope 3 times. You know, Nick, I got telling him how you helped that guy with one leg. I saved his life. I saved Nick's life. Nick overdosed on bleep, block that out. But anyway, he overdosed on some heroin, and I saved his life. I brought him back to life. He was literally on the floor, passed out. I was like, pop, CPR. Then I threw him in the shower after I got his heart going. Pop, smacking him. Like after we were staying in somebody's house in the back room, I put him in the shower. Cold waters, pop, wake up, pop. Woke up, he's like, oh shit, Kenny, thanks for saving my life. Oh, we gotta stop that, and it's not good for him. Can't be going in and out of the hospital doing drugs.
I was telling him how you were feeding that guy with one leg.
Feeding the guy with one leg,
The guy's in the hospital, you were bringing him food?
Oh yeah, Tommy. Tommy's a good guy. He's like, remember, average double playing.
I keep trying. I feel like I'm going nowhere. I'm just spinning my wheels. I'd love this to be a success story at the end of this. It's partly why you're here, because I really believed it in the beginning. But now again, of course, we just saw him and I have my doubts. It's very hard. It's very hard to see him like this. I mean, can you imagine seeing your child on the street like this? Could you imagine?
The problem is with inequality is that it's designed to exclude people. Because if I want a larger share of the economic pie for me, I necessarily am going to have to exclude others from competing for that same share. And so the wealth created, the extreme wealth, is created with the barriers. You can't have one without the other. And so Pope Francis has emphasized that if we want to look at issues like poverty or any other social issues, he says we have to tackle inequality because that's at the root of it. Because it's the wealth that's being created isn't neutral. It's being created partly at the expense of the rest of society.
In a meeting with the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, Pope Francis stressed that love and truth are needed when it comes to fighting against social and economic inequality. After welcoming the participants of the Council's plenary assembly, the Pope called attention to the disparity that exists in the world between rich and poor. The growth of such inequality, he said, threatens inclusive and participatory democracy.
Se la globalizzazione ha accresciuto notevolmente la ricchezza aggregata dell'insieme di parecchi singoli stati, essa ha anche inaspirito i divari tra i vari gruppi sociali, creando diseguaglianze e nuove povertà negli stessi paesi considerati più ricchi.
Well, right after we saw him in the parking lot of White Castle, 3 hours later he went into Maimonides Hospital looking for a shower, and they saw he was unstable. So they put him in the psych ward for evaluation, and he called me to get him out. So I called back immediately and said, no, don't let him out. So they said, yeah, we can see he's unstable, and we're going to keep him overnight and see how it is in the morning. And in the morning, they called me and said that he refused to sign the papers for Coney Island Hospital to release to see what he was on. So they couldn't administer anything, and their hands were tied because he still has rights, which is just amazing at this point. His Social Security check came in, and I refused to give it to him for a few days, and he went to his grandmother's house and was ranting and raving on her porch. She called the cops. And he's getting smarter now because he knows not to go to Coney Island Hospital even though he's 4 blocks away and he has a choice of hospitals. He said, take me back to Maimonides, which was miles away. Took him back to Maimonides Hospital, and 3 hours later he's on the phone. He was released with nothing. They didn't do anything. And this is after the police picked him up, which was really surprising. I thought they'd keep him for 24 hours. He's talking about going to Miami. Buy me a ticket to Miami. I'm leaving. And I just needed a break. And I said, no problem. So I buy him a bus ticket because he's been there before. Meanwhile, at the same time, I was unaware that the ACT team just got approved, which is a team that goes out, and if they don't know where he is, they'll find him and give him a shot. And they'll do whatever they need to do to, keep him on his meds. But guess what? He was on a bus to Miami already. So I was like, this is just great. They told me if I don't have him in here within a week, he's going to have to start all over again, and it takes months. I said, just come to my house and I'll deal with him for a few days to make sure I can get him to a Monday appointment with the ACT team. I told them I'd have him there on Monday, which is today. I put up with him for 2 days. I mean, last night I just wanted to kill him. He doesn't stop. He doesn't stop talking. He talks over you. He keeps talking. He talks to himself. in the car, in the backyard, walking around the house, pacing, and just talking. I mean, I even taped him in the backyard. He's not sad. He's very happy. He's very happy and laughing and just hysterical with himself. He's not going to hurt anybody, but he's really sick. So, thank God I got him to the ACT team today. I'm just on the edge. I really am. If I don't get some help very soon, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just on the verge of just cut him off and not talk to him anymore. I really am. It's really tough right now. It's very tough.
Tell us your name and a little bit about your background.
My name is Stanley Richards. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Fortune Society. I'm also formerly incarcerated. For a significant portion of my life, I've spent it cycling in and out of jail and prisons. My last prison stay was from 1986 to 1991. I was released after serving 4.5 years. And it was during that incarceration that the opportunity to go to school presented itself, and I went to school and I obtained my GED and began to have confidence in my ability to learn and engage. And then I went on to college when I was in prison and graduated from college, magna cum laude. And I came home and I applied for a job at Fortune, and Fortune hired me as a counselor in 1991.
Do you have anything to say about your experience with clients who have experienced homelessness? What type of things they've said, what type of obstacles they've had to face?
I always say people leave prison. Nobody leaves prison saying, I'll be back in 6 months. People leave prison saying, I don't want to come back. I want to figure out how to live a life out there. And they run into multiple obstacles. Obstacles around accessing benefits, obstacles around accessing resources, trying to obtain a job, not having the skills to get a job, not having the educational requirements to get a job, homelessness, being put in a shelter where you're talking about being put in a room with 60, 70 men who some are using drugs, some have significant mental health issues, stealing, crime, all kind of stuff going on. And at the same time, they're trying to reclaim their lives. So the transition from prison is massively, massively complicated. And at Fortune Society, one of the things we try to do is interrupt those cycles. So our model is multiple points of entry. So you can walk into our agency and say, I'm formerly incarcerated, and you'll meet with a counselor. And that counselor will do an assessment, find out what your needs are, and match your needs to our resources, either internally or externally.
All right, let's just talk about what has happened and what's been going on since last time we've seen each other.
I had to attend a function with the Mayor de Blasio, and I grabbed him for a second, and I told him my situation, that my son was schizophrenic and that he's been waiting for housing for over a year. Is there anything he can do? So he said, call my aide and we'll see what we can do. So I got hold of his aide, and they actually helped. They immediately got him an appointment for housing, since he's already been on the list for a long time. He went to the housing last week and immediately turned it down because he can't follow rules. He doesn't like to have any rules. He just wants to live on his own, but he can't live on his own. There's no possible way.
Can you talk just a little bit also about, and I think you've already done this, how heartbreaking it is for you to go through this for so long?
Heartbreaking is not the word for me. It's every time I say to myself, I'm not going to deal with this anymore, the next thing I'm worried, and I'm like, all right, where is he? Is he in jail? Is he dead? When things come over the radio, that locations where he goes by, like a guy was shot on East 19th and Church, and I know he's there on the corner sometimes. I think it's him. I don't think he's going to be alive very much longer if he's on the streets. There's just no way. And it's like almost every day I'm waiting for that phone call. He's in jail. He's been hurt. It's every day. He got a ticket for sleeping on the train a couple months ago. I mean, this is the way they get rid of the homeless, is just by arresting them. for whatever they can. They just make up charges, or I'm not saying that I'm sure he's guilty of a lot of these things. I'm sure he was sleeping on the subway. I'm sure he broke into a building to go to sleep. I'm sure he got in the car to go to sleep. But they should be putting him in a hospital, not in corrections. Not going to help him. He doesn't get it. We've punished him, and there's no correcting him. Once it's done, it's out of his mind. It's just a totally new thing. But I'm just about at the end. I don't know what else I can do. I mean, this is why you lose people like this, because you can't get them help. You try to get them help, and you cannot. They just won't take the help. How do you force a 24-year-old to take the help? It's just not possible.
Hey everyone, how's it going? This is my new apartment. I love it. It's awesome. My first apartment I ever lived in. I'm really enjoying it. I hope everyone's doing well. God bless. I wish everyone good health. Hope everyone's doing great. I really do love this apartment. Thanks for everything, and thanks for the help, everybody.
Well, it's been a long road, as you know. This has been going on for years. It's taken a long time to get here. I'm sure that the adventure is not over, but this is a huge step. I'm really happy that he has his own place. He feels independent now. And I'm hoping this helps him grow up. He is learning how to take care of himself and being on his own. It's a huge step for him. I had a lot of help on the way down this road. I'd like to thank all the people that have helped me. It's been a lot of people that have put together, that have got this far, and it's really a great moment. Thank God for the ACT Center, Bensonhurst ACT team, who's been on top of him, and he actually likes them, and they've been keeping on his meds, which makes a big difference in his life, and they've done a great job. Without them, I don't know where I'd be. There's been a lot of times where I've given up, and I didn't want to deal with it anymore, because it was too hard for me. It was hard for my family. And, I couldn't get him to get on the straight and narrow. It took a very long time. I stuck with it. Yes, there's times I've given up, but I've always came back to, I need to help him. That this is an illness, and we'll get the best of it. So far, I'm sure it's not over. We've made some great strides, and he's getting older. As a matter of fact, it's his birthday today, and I wanted to wish him a happy birthday. Thanks, Ed. I love you.
Love you too, Pop.
And I really wish great things for you.
Thanks, Dad.